You know those people who somehow make the chaos of life look like an art form? That's us, Emma and me. My name's Jack, by the way. I'm 42, married to Emma for 12 years. And together we've got 2 kids who could probably run circles around most adults. Ella, 8, is a little firecracker with her mom's quick wit and my talent for asking why a little too often. Then there's Max, 4, who's basically a tornado with legs. If he's not knee-deep in mud, he's trying to ride the dog like a pony. Emma's my rock, plain and simple. She's one of those people who walks into a room and somehow makes it feel brighter. She's been working as a dental hygienist for the last decade, which means she spends her days convincing people they should floss more and trying not to gag when they don't. She's good at it, though, really good. Patients love her. Honestly, I think they keep coming back just to hear her laugh. Me? I'm a regional sales manager for a company that sells industrial machinery. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, keeps the pantry stocked, and lets us afford our home. A cozy suburban place that screams family lives here. We've got the minivan in the driveway, a trampoline in the backyard, and a fridge covered in magnets holding up crayon drawings and soccer schedules. We're busy, sure, but who isn't? Between Emma's work, my job, Ella's piano lessons, and Max's habit of getting into anything he can reach, our days are full, but they're good. The kind of good you don't always stop to appreciate until you're sitting on the couch at the end of the day with a glass of wine, Emma, or a cold beer, me, and the house is finally quiet. Our marriage? Solid. Not perfect, because who's perfect? But we've got each other's backs. Emma's the type who'll call me out if I'm slacking, but she'll also leave a sticky note in my lunch that says, "You've got this." She's not afraid to speak her mind, and yes, sometimes that means we clash, but it also means we don't let things fester. The kids keep us on our toes, though. Ella's at that age where she's starting to test boundaries, talking back a little, asking the kind of questions you're not sure how to answer. And Max? Let's just say he's got a future in demolition if his bedroom walls survive long enough for him to grow up. But at the end of the day, we're a team. Emma and I have this unspoken agreement. No matter how crazy life gets, we've got each other's backs. Whether it's tag-teaming bath time, sneaking in a quick date night, or just collapsing on the couch to binge-watch a show after the kids are asleep, we make it work. I'd be lying if I said I never wondered how we got here, though. Life wasn't always soccer practices and PTO meetings. Once upon a time, it was late-night drives, bar hopping, and way too much cheap beer. Emma and I met in college. She was all fire and confidence, the kind of person who walked into a room and made it hers. I fell hard, and somehow, she fell for me too. So here we are, 12 years in and counting. Some days it feels like we're running a marathon with no finish line, but there's no one I'd rather be running it with. It all started like any other Friday night dinner with friends. Jim and Kelly, our old college buddies, were over for one of Emma's famous, let's impress everyone meals. The house smelled like garlic bread and roasted chicken. The kids were tucked in bed, and the wine was flowing just enough to loosen everyone up but not enough to make anyone sloppy. Emma, as usual, was the perfect host. She glided around the table, refilling glasses, making everyone laugh, and looking effortlessly beautiful in that way that always made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot. I was doing my part too, mostly by staying out of her way and making sure Jim had a fresh beer whenever he needed one. The conversation drifted into familiar territory, college stories, stupid decisions, and exaggerated tales that got funnier with each retelling. Then, somewhere between Emma bringing out dessert and Jim cracking a joke about his old dorm room, Kelly dropped a bombshell that blew the whole evening apart. "Oh my God, you'll never guess who I ran into at the store the other day," she said, leaning forward like she was about to spill the juiciest gossip of the year. "Trevor. You remember Trevor, right?" Emma's smile faltered for the briefest second. If I hadn't been watching her so closely, I might have missed it. "Trevor," she repeated, her voice steady, but her hand tightening just slightly on the edge of the table. "Yeah, Trevor," Kelly said, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the air. "From that party after graduation. You remember him, don't you? Tall, kind of wiry, always wore that stupid leather jacket. Anyway, he's got 3 kids now. Can you believe that? 3. I didn't even recognize him at first. He doesn't look anything like he did in college. But he recognized me right away. He said, 'Hey, Kelly, remember that party in the basement?'" Emma's laugh was a fraction too loud, a shade too bright. Wow, Trevor with 3 kids. That's wild. I can't even picture it. Kelly nodded enthusiastically, still oblivious. Right? And get this, he mentioned you, Emma. Said something about how it was such a crazy night and how we were all wild back then. Oh, Jack, she said, suddenly turning to me. This was before you and Emma were together, of course. I froze. My mind flashed back to college, those blurry, chaotic years when Emma and I were figuring out what we were to each other. Except there was one thing I was sure of. We had been together after graduation. I'd been dating her for nearly 6 months by the time that party would have happened. Kelly kept talking, rambling on about how funny it was to see Trevor as a family man now. Emma just smiled and nodded, saying all the right things, but her body language was screaming at me. She was stiff, her hands too busy with the dishes, her laughter forced. And I just sat there, silent, piecing it all together. Trevor, the party, the basement. My stomach churned, and my brain raced to fill in the blanks. Kelly didn't realize what she'd said, didn't know she'd just torn the rug out from under me. But Emma knew. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, in the way her voice tightened every time she spoke. I didn't say a word. Not then. I couldn't. The rest of the evening went on like nothing had happened, at least on the surface. Jim and Kelly said their goodbyes. Emma waved them off with a smile, and I helped clear the table in silence. You're awfully quiet, I said, my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was about to explode. Emma didn't turn around. Just tired, she replied, her tone clipped. It was a long night. I took a step closer. Yeah, it was, especially that little trip down memory lane. Trevor, huh? Quite the coincidence. Her hand froze mid-wipe, and for a moment, the kitchen was so silent I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then she straightened up, her movements slow and deliberate, and finally turned to face me. What are you getting at, Jack? She asked, her voice carefully neutral, like she was trying to preemptively defuse a bomb. I pushed off the doorway and stepped into the room. I think you know exactly what I'm getting at. Kelly's little story about Trevor. The party. The basement. I folded my arms again, more to stop myself from shaking than anything else. That happened while we were together, Emma. So, why don't you tell me what really went on? Her eyes darted to the side for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. Jack, that was over 20 years ago. Are we really going to dredge up ancient history because Kelly can't hold her wine? Don't do that. I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't turn this into something it's not. This isn't about Kelly. It's about you, and it's about Trevor. Did something happen? Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. You're being ridiculous. Kelly was drunk, Jack. She barely remembers what she said half the time. And you're going to take her word over mine? I'm taking her word, I said evenly, because you're not giving me anything to take yours. For the first time, Emma faltered. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and she leaned against the counter like she needed it to hold her up. It was a long time ago, she said quietly. That's not an answer, I said, stepping closer. Emma, I deserve the truth. Whatever it is, just say it. She met my eyes then, and I saw something I hadn't expected, fear. Emma, my sharp-tongued, unflappable wife, was scared, and that scared me more than anything else. There was a moment, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was stupid, Jack. I was drunk, he was there, and it didn't mean anything. It was just a mistake. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I'd braced myself for this answer, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. How far did it go? I asked, my voice flat, emotionless. She hesitated. We kissed, she said finally. That's all. I swear, Jack. It didn't go any further. I stared at her, trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth or just giving me the version she thought I could live with. You kissed him, I repeated, more to myself than to her. Yes, she said, her voice trembling now. And I hated myself for it. I swear, Jack, it was nothing. It was a stupid, drunken mistake, and I've regretted it ever since. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the image of her at that party, with some guy I didn't know, wouldn't leave my mind. You should have told me, I said finally, my voice tight. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her eyes welling up. We were so happy back then, Jack. I didn't want to ruin that over something that didn't even matter. It mattered to me, I said quietly. It matters now. Emma wiped at her eyes, her composure starting to crack. I love you, Jack. I've always loved you. Please don't let something that happened 2 decades ago tear us apart. I leaned against the counter, running a hand through my hair. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage at her for keeping this from me. But another part, the part that had spent 12 years building a life with her, wanted to believe that this one mistake didn't define our marriage. What do you want me to do, Emma? I asked finally. Just pretend this never happened? Forget Kelly said anything? No, she said quickly. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Jack. Just tell me what you need. I didn't have an answer for her. Not yet. The truth was, I didn't know what I needed. All I knew was that things between us would never be the same. After Emma and I went to bed that night, her feigning sleep while I stared at the ceiling like it was the portal to the answers I needed, I realized I couldn't leave it alone. Her half-confession had only cracked the surface. I needed to know what really happened at that party, even if it meant dragging the truth out of someone else. The next morning, while Emma was busy making pancakes for the kids, I snuck off to the garage and made the call. Kelly picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy like she was nursing a hangover. Hello? Kelly, it's Jack, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Hey, Jack, she replied, her tone cautious. I need to ask you about Trevor, I said, cutting straight to the point. There was a long pause, the kind that makes your stomach twist. Jack, I don't think I can help you with that, she finally said. Why not? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She sighed. Look, I probably said too much last night. I shouldn't have brought it up at all. Emma called me this morning, and she... Of course she did, I muttered, cutting her off. What did she say? She asked me not to stir up old drama. She's my friend, Jack. I don't want to get in the middle of this. You're already in the middle of it, I snapped. You're the one who opened this can of worms. Now you're telling me you won't help me close it. Jack, she said softly. I'm sorry. I can't. And just like that, she hung up. I stared at my phone, my jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might crack. Emma was circling the wagons, trying to lock down the truth before I could get to it. Fine. If Kelly wouldn't talk, I'd go straight to the source. That's when I made my second call. Hey, Tommy, I said when my friend from the police department answered. You got a minute? Sure, Jack, he said, sounding curious. What's up? This is going to sound weird, but I need to track someone down. His name's Trevor, and he went to college with Emma and me. I don't have much else to go on, but I think he's still local. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You're not about to do something stupid, are you? No. Primelit. I just need to talk to him. It's personal. Tommy sighed. All right, give me a couple hours. I'll see what I can find. By noon, I had Trevor's address in hand. He lived on the other side of town, in a modest-looking duplex. When I knocked on the door, I half hoped he wouldn't answer, but a moment later, it swung open to reveal a man who looked like life had run him over a few times. Trevor wasn't the wiry, leather jacket-wearing guy Kelly had described. He had a slight paunch, thinning hair, and a wary look in his eyes. Yeah, he said, squinting at me. Trevor, right? I asked. Who's asking? My name's Jack. I went to college with you. Well, sort of. We didn't know each other, but you were friends with Emma. The mention of her name made him stiffen. Emma who? Emma Sanders. Now Emma Mitchell. She's my wife. Trevor blinked, and for a moment, I thought he might slam the door in my face. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned against the frame. What do you want, man? I need to know the truth, I said, my voice steady but firm. Kelly told me about the party after graduation. The basement. I need to know what happened between you and Emma. Trevor sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I don't know what you think you're going to get out of this, but I don't owe you anything. You don't? I agreed. But you're not just talking to a stranger. You're talking to the guy who's been married to her for 12 years, who has 2 kids with her, who thought he knew her. I deserve to know the truth. Trevor studied me for a long moment, and I could see the gears turning in his head. Finally, he stepped back and gestured for me to come inside. His living room was small and cluttered, with toys scattered across the floor. His 3 kids, I assumed. He sat down on the couch and motioned for me to take the chair across from him. All right, he said, exhaling deeply. I'll tell you what I remember. But it's not pretty. I nodded, bracing myself. Emma and Kelly were wild back then, he began. We all were, honestly. There were a lot of parties, a lot of drinking and experimenting. Emma and Kelly were close, really close. Sometimes let's just say, they weren't shy about getting creative. I swallowed hard, my stomach churning. I didn't know Emma had a boyfriend, Trevor continued. She never mentioned you. To me, it was just college stuff, you know? Stupid, reckless fun. But if I'd known she was with someone, I wouldn't have, he trailed off, shaking his head. What exactly happened at that party? I asked, my voice tight. Trevor hesitated. It wasn't just a kiss, if that's what you're wondering. Emma and Kelly were. Well, let's just say they were both involved. And so was I. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, hadn't just kissed someone. She'd been part of something I couldn't even wrap my head around. Thanks, I said, standing abruptly. I've heard enough. I drove home from Trevor's place in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. His words echoed in my head like a bad song I couldn't turn off. It wasn't just a kiss. Emma hadn't just cheated. She'd done it in a way that felt almost deliberate, like I wasn't even a consideration back then. And maybe I wasn't. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the weight of it all had settled on my chest like a cinder block. The house looked so normal from the outside. Lights glowing in the windows, the faint sound of Ella and Max's laughter drifting out. But inside, my world was crumbling. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the house and thinking about the kids. Ella, who was starting to figure out that the world wasn't always fair, and Max, who still thought every day was an adventure waiting to be had. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of something that wasn't their fault. But what was I supposed to do? Stay in a marriage built on lies? Pretend everything was fine when it wasn't? I couldn't unlearn what I knew. The truth was like a splinter under my skin, and no amount of pretending was going to make it go away. When I finally walked inside, Emma was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up from the couch, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd been crying. Good. At least one of us was. We need to talk, I said, my voice flat. She nodded, swallowing hard. The kids are upstairs. I told them we were just having a grown-up conversation. Good. I sat down in the armchair across from her, the one I always joked was my dad throne. Funny how that seemed like a lifetime ago. I want to see Trevor, I said, not bothering to ease into it. Her face went blank for a moment, then crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand, but not before I saw the tremble in her lip. Jack, I didn't. Why would you? I needed the truth. I interrupted. And I got it. He told me everything, Emma. The party, the experimenting. I practically spat the word. And the fact that you never told him you had a boyfriend. That you had me. Her eyes filled with tears. Jack, I was young and stupid. I was selfish. I didn't know what I wanted back then. But I know now. I know that I love you. That I love the life we've built together. You don't get to say that, I snapped, my voice rising. You don't get to talk about love when you didn't even respect me enough to tell me the truth. You let me sit at that dinner table last night, clueless, while Kelly spilled the kind of secrets that should never have been secrets in the first place. She broke then, sobbing into her hands. I didn't want to lose you, Jack. I didn't want to ruin what we had. I made a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake, and I've spent every day of our marriage trying to make up for it. Please don't throw this all away because of something that happened so long ago. I leaned back in the chair, my head pounding. It's not just about the past, Emma. It's about trust. How am I supposed to trust you now? How am I supposed to believe that there aren't more skeletons in the closet? More things you haven't told me? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I'll do anything, Jack. Anything to save this marriage. Take me to a lie detector test if you need to. I'll prove to you that there's nothing else. Just don't give up on us. Please. I let her words hang in the air, weighing them against the anger and betrayal swirling inside me. I wanted a divorce. I wanted to walk away, take the kids, and start over. But then I thought about Ella and Max, about how much they loved their mom, how much they loved us. Splitting up wouldn't just hurt Emma. It would hurt them. I don't know if I could do this anymore, I said finally, my voice cracking. But if we do get a divorce, the kids stay with me. The house stays with me. You can go wherever. I don't care." Emma's breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might fall apart completely. But then she straightened up, wiping her face with trembling hands. "Jack," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "If you're going to throw everything away, at least give me a chance to fix it first. Let me stay here. Let me prove to you that I can be better, that I can be the wife you deserve. If I can't, then I'll walk away and you can have everything. The house, the kids, all of it. But please just give me a second chance. Let me earn it." Her desperation was palpable, and for the first time, I saw just how terrified she was of losing everything. It wasn't just the house or the kids. It was me. She didn't want to lose me. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up. "But don't expect me to forgive you overnight. If we're going to try this, you're starting from scratch. And I mean scratch." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the silence of the living room. The days after my confrontation with Emma were a blur. I went through the motions of work, parenting, and pretending life was normal, but inside, I was like a ticking time bomb. Every time Emma walked into the room, I felt a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I couldn't look at her without thinking about Trevor and that damn party. The betrayal was 2 decades old, but it felt fresh, like the wound had just been reopened. And that's what kept gnawing at me. On paper, Emma and I had a wonderful marriage. We'd built a life together, raised 2 amazing kids, and weathered all the ups and downs that come with being partners for over a decade. But trust? Trust was the foundation of it all, and hers was in pieces. I thought back to all the little moments in our marriage that I'd taken for granted. The way she always left sticky notes in my lunchbox, the way she rubbed my shoulders after a long day, the way she kissed me goodnight even when we were too tired to talk. Those moments had felt real, authentic. But now, every single one of them was under suspicion. The question that haunted me wasn't whether I still loved Emma. I did, even if I didn't want to admit it. The question was whether love was enough when trust was gone. By the 3rd day, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know if there were more secrets, more skeletons lurking in the shadows. Emma had offered to take a polygraph, and I decided to call her bluff. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cautious but hopeful. "I've been thinking," I said, standing in the doorway with my hands shoved in my pockets. "If we're going to move forward, if we're even going to try, I need to know everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. So I'm taking you up on that offer." "The polygraph." Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. "Okay, whatever it takes, Jack. I'll do it." I studied her for a moment, searching for any sign of hesitation or guilt, but she held my gaze. "Good," I said finally. "I've been looking into companies. There's one in the neighboring city that's supposed to be really thorough, but it's pricey. And it's a bit of a drive." Emma perked up at that. "Actually, I found something," she said, holding up her phone. "There's a local company that does polygraphs and background checks. I looked them up after we talked the other night. They're reputable, and the reviews are good." I walked over and took the phone from her, scrolling through the website she had pulled up. It looked legitimate enough. Clean design, testimonials from satisfied clients, and a list of services that included everything from pre-employment screenings to marital disputes. "You've been doing your homework," I said, handing the phone back to her. "I want to fix this, Jack," she said quietly. "I want you to trust me again." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of Trevor's words. "We'll see," I said, heading toward the kitchen to grab a beer. "I'll call them tomorrow." The truth was, I'd already made up my mind about the future of our marriage. The polygraph wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. I'd spent too many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine a life where I could trust Emma again, and I kept coming up empty. No matter what the results of the test were, I knew I couldn't stay married to her. But I needed to know the whole truth before I ended things for myself and for our kids. If I was going to break our family apart, I wanted to be damn sure I wasn't making a mistake. That night, As I lay in bed beside Emma, I thought about how different things were now compared to when we first got together. Back then, I'd seen her as this unstoppable force, smart, beautiful, and full of life. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. But now, all I could see were the cracks in the facade. The lies, the secrets, the betrayals. I'd spent years building a life with her, trusting her, and loving her, only to find out that the foundation was rotting underneath. I didn't hate her, not yet, but I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The next morning, I called the local polygraph company and scheduled an appointment for the following week. Emma agreed to it without hesitation, which surprised me. Part of me had expected her to backtrack or try to talk me out of it, but she didn't. Instead, she spent the next few days acting like a model wife. She cooked my favorite meals, offered to take on extra chores around the house, and even left one of her signature sticky notes in my lunchbox. No matter what, I love you. Always. It almost felt normal again. Almost. But every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the betrayal, of Trevor, of Kelly's drunken confession. And I knew, deep down, that no amount of sticky notes or home-cooked meals could erase the damage that had been done. The day of the polygraph was a quiet one. Emma and I barely spoke as we drove to the testing facility, the silence between us filled with everything we weren't saying. She was pale and tense, her hands clutching her bag like it was a life raft. I couldn't tell if she was nervous about the test itself or about what the results might do to us. The facility was clean and professional, the kind of place that looked like it handled a lot of uncomfortable situations with practiced ease. The technician, a man named Dave, walked us through the process calmly, explaining that he'd adjusted the questions to make them clearer and more suited for the test. Emma followed him into the testing room, while I stayed behind in the waiting area. It felt strange, sitting there by myself, knowing she was hooked up to a machine that would dissect every word she said. I kept my hands in my lap, tapping my fingers against my knee to pass the time. After what felt like forever, they finally came out. Emma looked pale, but composed, her eyes darting toward mine as if searching for reassurance. I didn't offer any. The technician handed me a sealed envelope containing the results and wished us luck. The drive home was as silent as the drive there. Emma didn't ask what the results said, and I didn't volunteer to open the envelope. I needed time to process, to think about what all this even meant for us. When we got home, I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting in front of me. Emma hovered nearby, pretending to busy herself with tidying up, but clearly waiting for me to open it. Finally, I tore it open and pulled out the report. The results were laid out in dry, clinical detail, each question and answer accompanied by a neat little summary. I skimmed through them quickly, noting the pattern. Truth, truth, truth. Everything lined up with what Emma had said. She had been faithful to me since the beginning of our marriage. She regretted what happened with Trevor. She loved me. But then I came across one question that made me pause. It was a strange one I hadn't included myself. Clearly, it had been added by Emma or the technician. During the incident with Trevor, did you imagine Jack instead of Trevor? Emma's answer was yes, and the polygraph indicated it was truthful. I stared at the page, my mind racing. It was such a bizarre, almost absurd thing to say. What did it even mean? Was it her way of trying to soften the blow, to make it seem like the betrayal wasn't as bad as it was? Or was it something else? I looked up at Emma, who was watching me nervously, her hands twisting together. She must have seen the confusion, or maybe the disbelief, on my face, because she spoke before I could. Jack, she said softly, I know it sounds strange, but it's true. I wasn't thinking about Trevor. I was thinking about you. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but it's the truth. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I folded the report neatly and set it down on the table. The truth was it didn't matter. That question, strange as it was, didn't change the fact that she betrayed me. Well, I said finally, leaning back in my chair, looks like you were telling the truth. Emma let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. Jack, I meant everything I said. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I just want us to get through this together. I nodded slowly, my expression carefully neutral. You've done what you needed to do, Emma, and I believe you. But this doesn't change the fact that the trust between us is broken. That's not something you can fix overnight. Her face fell, her relief replaced by panic. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to get a divorce, I said, my voice steady. We can't just sweep this under the rug. But that doesn't mean it's the end. If we can work through this, if we can rebuild trust, I'm open to the idea of starting over. Of marrying you again, but it has to be from scratch. Her lip trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. You mean we'd start over, after a divorce? Yes, I said firmly. But you'll stay here, with me. For the kids' sake. We'll live together, but not as husband and wife. And if, after all this, I feel like we can make it work, we'll try again. But it's going to take time, Emma. A lot of time. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes, Jack. I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and left the kitchen, leaving the envelope on the table. Deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about the past. The polygraph had confirmed Emma's story, but it hadn't erased my doubts. And there were things I hadn't told her yet. Things I'd uncovered in the days since Kelly's confession. For now, I'd play along. But the truth I held would change everything, and Emma had no idea what was coming. A few months had passed since the polygraph test, and the divorce was finally finalized. On paper, it was amicable, no shouting matches, no dramatic court battles. Emma had agreed to give me full custody of the kids, the house, and pretty much everything else, all under the guise of earning my forgiveness and rebuilding what we had. She still lived with us, acting as the picture-perfect mother and housemate, trying to prove herself every single day. And she really was trying. I had to give her that. Emma had become the best version of herself in those months. She cooked, cleaned, helped Ella with her homework, and made sure Max's days were filled with laughter. She went out of her way to be kind to me, even when I was cold and distant. It was the kind of effort that would have made any man second-guess his decision. But not me. Not after what I knew. It all came back to that polygraph test, to that one bizarre question about imagining me instead of Trevor. At first, it had just seemed like a desperate attempt to soften the blow of her betrayal. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Why would a professional technician include such a question? It was absurd, almost laughable. Unless, of course, the technician wasn't impartial. The day after the polygraph, when Emma was at work and the kids were at school, I started digging. I looked up the company she'd suggested, the one she'd conveniently found online. It didn't take long to discover that it wasn't some big, established operation. It was a small, locally owned business run by a man named Richard Kerr. A quick search of his social media showed a photo of him standing outside his office, smiling in front of a sign that read Kerr Polygraph Services. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, but I kept digging. I scrolled through more photos, more posts, until finally I found what I was looking for, a photo of Richard Kerr and Emma, taken just a few months ago. She wasn't tagged in it, but I recognized her immediately. They were standing outside a coffee shop, smiling like old friends, or something more. My stomach turned. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started watching her. When I said I was going to work, I was actually on sick leave. I spent my days tailing her, taking photos, logging every move she made. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. She met with Richard Kerr regularly, always at discreet places, a coffee shop on the edge of town, a park, and once a motel. I watched them go inside, waited for over an hour, and then saw them leave separately, looking around like they were afraid someone might see them. That was all the confirmation I needed. The polygraph results had been faked. The whole thing had been a setup, orchestrated by Emma to manipulate me into believing her lies. But I didn't confront her immediately. No, EVICTED. I let her think she'd gotten away with it. Let her keep up her charade of being the perfect wife. And all the while, I prepared. The day of reckoning came not long after the divorce was finalized. I waited until the kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover, then called Emma into the living room. She walked in cautiously, sensing the shift in my tone when I called her name. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I gestured to the couch. "Sit down." She obeyed, perching on the edge like she was ready to bolt at any moment. "I know," I said simply. Her brow furrowed. "You know what?" "About Richard Kerr," I said, watching her face closely. "The man from the polygraph company. The one you've been meeting with for months. I know you slept with him. I know he faked the results of your test. I know everything, Emma." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then, she tried to laugh, the sound high and brittle. "Jack, that's ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." I leaned forward, holding up my phone. "Really? Because I got photos. Of you and him at the motel. Of you meeting him at the coffee shop. Of you walking into his office after hours. Do you want to keep denying it? Or should I keep going?" Her laughter died instantly, replaced by a look of pure panic. "Jack, please let me explain." "No," I said sharply, cutting her off. "No more lies. No more manipulations. I gave you a chance, Emma. I'll let you stay here. I'll let you play your little games because I wanted to believe you could change. But you've only proven that you can't." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to reach for me, but I pulled back. "You're leaving," I said, my voice cold. "Tonight. You have no claim to this house, no claim to our kids, and no claim to me. You signed it all away when you agreed to the divorce terms. I let you believe there was a chance for forgiveness, but there isn't. Not anymore." "Jack," she sobbed, "please don't do this. I'll fix it. You've already broken it," I said, standing up, "and I'm done trying to fix what you keep destroying." I walked away, leaving her there in tears, knowing she had no choice but to pack her things and leave. As I sat alone in the kitchen that night, the house eerily quiet, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. The only thing I knew for sure was that I'd never let her back into my life. Not after this. The house was quieter than it had ever been. After Emma left that night, it was like a void had opened up. Sure, the kids were still there, running around and filling the rooms with their laughter and chaos during the day. But at night, when they were asleep, the silence felt deafening. Emma had begged, pleaded, and cried as she packed her things that evening. I stood by, arms crossed, watching her. A small part of me, a very small part, wanted to cave. But the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal were too much. She'd made her choices, and I was done being played. I let her walk out the door with nothing but her clothes and the faint hope that maybe, someday, she'd figure out how badly she'd screwed up. The kids didn't know the full story, of course. All they knew was that their mom had moved out, and I told them it was because we needed some time apart. Ella, being older and sharper than her years, had pressed me with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Max, blissfully unaware of the complexities of adult relationships, just asked if Mommy would still come to his soccer games. I told them both what I could, which wasn't much. The truth would come later when they were ready, and when I was. The days that followed were a strange mix of freedom and grief. I finally felt like I could breathe again, like I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells. But there was also a weight that wouldn't go away, a gnawing sense of loss that hit me at the most unexpected times. I'd walk into the kitchen and expect to see Emma standing there, humming along to some song while she cooked. I'd sit down at the end of a long day and instinctively look for her on the couch, only to remember she was gone. I didn't miss her, exactly. Not the Emma who had lied to me and cheated on me, who had gone behind my back to fake a polygraph test and manipulate me into staying. But I missed the idea of her, the woman I thought I married, the partner I thought I had. One night, about a week after she left, I found myself sitting in the garage with a beer in hand, staring at the wall. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and I was alone with my thoughts. For the first time in months, I let myself feel everything I'd been pushing down: the anger, the sadness, the betrayal, the confusion. It all came pouring out, and I sat there in the dim light, trying to make sense of a life that had been turned upside down. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay stuck in that place. I had 2 kids who needed me, a job that demanded my attention, and a life that wasn't going to pause just because mine felt like it had shattered. So I made a decision. I was going to move forward. Not for Emma, not for some hope of reconciliation, but for myself and my kids. The first step was getting the house in order. Emma's things were gone, but her presence lingered in subtle ways. A bottle of perfume on the bathroom counter, a forgotten sweater draped over a chair. I gathered everything that was hers and packed it into a box, which I dropped off at her new place without saying a word. It wasn't about spite or anger. It was about reclaiming my space. Next, I threw myself into being the best dad I could be. I started cooking more real meals, not just mac and cheese and chicken nuggets. I made it a point to sit down with Ella and Max every night, asking about their day, helping with homework, and making sure they knew they could talk to me about anything. It wasn't perfect, and there were nights when the weight of it all felt like too much, but I kept going. For them. Emma, to her credit, tried to stay involved. She called regularly to check on the kids, showed up for their events, and even offered to help with school projects. I didn't stop her. She was still their mom, and whatever issues we had, I didn't want to take that away from them. But I kept my distance, keeping our interactions polite and brief. Over time, I started to feel like myself again. The anger dulled, the sadness became manageable, and the betrayal that once felt like an open wound began to scar over. I knew I'd never fully forgive Emma for what she'd done, but I also knew I couldn't let her actions define the rest of my life. One evening, Ella asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. But then I looked at her, at the curious, thoughtful little girl who was growing up way too fast, and I realized the truth. "I'm getting there," I said. "Happiness isn't always easy, but we're working on it, aren't we?" She nodded, giving me one of those smiles that could light up the darkest room. "Yeah, we are." And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the life I was building now could be better than the one I left behind. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be mine.